Good morning, everyone. I think this is our 11th webinar with Tom Fox. As always, lots to celebrate with Isabel. We had a fantastic last couple of weeks, which she'll share with the group. We hosted an event with Sérgio Moro, Pier Paolo Bottini, Lígia from Fundação Getúlio Vargas. It was really a very successful event, and as always, such a pleasure to be by her side. Isabel will introduce a couple of housekeeping rules before I introduce everyone to Tom Fox, who really dispenses introductions here, but I'll try to resume some of his accolades. Please make sure to, for those of you who want to listen to the webinar in Portuguese, I'll say this in Portuguese. Para quem precisar de interpretação, eu peço que vocês entrem nas três bolinhas ao lado das anotações, e aí vai ter a opção ali de tradução intérprete, tá bom? Isabel?
Thank you so much, Cynthia. It's always a fabulous opportunity to be here with Tom Fox and my dear friend Cynthia. And I'm very happy to say this is our 11th, Tom, 11th time that you're here in Brazil with us. And many times I know you don't hear about it, but we do. We go to all of these events here in Brazil, and people say, "Oh, we love Breakfast with Tom Fox," and it's so true. Some of the students came to me 2 weeks ago in a congress by Isaiah, and said, "Oh, we cannot get Tom's book." From Amazon. And so please stay with me, because now we will fix this. We have someone who will be taking care of the Brazilians, all of the Brazilians' requests for Tom's book. So please let me know. You can write to me via LinkedIn or WhatsApp, what have you, and I will make the contact with this person who will who will obviously charge for the book and send the book directly to Brazil. Okay? But other than that, Cynthia, it was a fabulous event. The 10 years of Lava Jato that Cynthia and I put together at AmCham, the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce, last week in person with Pier Paolo Bottini, Sérgio Moro, and Professor Lígia Maura. And the very good news, Cynthia, is that we now have a link of the recording of the event. So people will be able to follow it on your site, or our site, as if it was that site, or CRA site. Those of you who were not able to come, and we never told anybody that we were going to record it, so that people who had planned to go to the in person did come, and we had I don't know, 150 people. But anyway, the reason why I'm a little shaky right now is, I'm very sorry, is because our dear friend Flavia, who's the head of the compliance commission at the Brazilian Bar Association, had a big loss in her life. Someone very dear to her passed away earlier this morning, and so she will not be able to join us, but she will definitely come to our breakfast, and she sends her best regards to everyone, and she says she's very sorry that she will not be here. So Cynthia, they will be stuck with you and me, okay? But as usual, Tom will speak about the theme of today for whatever time he wants. And then please put your questions directly to Tom in the Q&R box of a Q&A. I'm mixing Portuguese and English. In our perguntas e respostas box, we have our interpreter, Carlos. Thank you, Carlos. And Cynthia and I will pick up your questions and direct them to Tom. And when you do that, please identify yourself and the organization you belong to, if you wish, obviously. And Tom will answer your questions in English, and Carlos will do his beautiful job of translating them. So, without further ado, Tom, you have the podium.
Well, thank you. And it's really a pleasure to be back with you. I greatly enjoy our breakfast time together, even if it's only quarterly. I really appreciate what you guys did in coming up with this idea. So today I'm going to talk about a development which you may initially think really doesn't have a lot of application to you in Brazil. But if you work for a multinational company that in any way does business in the United States, if you work for a company that sends emails to the United States, if you work for a company that somehow your financial transactions are routed through a U.S. banking system, this absolutely applies to you. And it applies to you in a nuts and bolts way that I'm going to hopefully spend most of my time talking about today, because I want everyone to understand that you, we, the compliance profession, are under as much pressure in 2024 as we were in 2004, and perhaps even more. So hopefully I wrote a white paper on the topic, and the topic is the new Department of Justice whistleblower program, and Isabel was kind enough to translate it. So I have a dual language paper for your consideration on this. In March, the Department of Justice announced that they were going to put together a whistleblower financial incentive program. If you have any familiar with the United States, you understand that there is one currently in place via law with the Securities and Exchange Commission, but the Department of Justice never had a formal program. So the number 2 at the DOJ, the Deputy Attorney General, directed that within 90 days, a pilot program be created. They missed that deadline, but they have released a pilot program. And the pilot program basically says that the Department of Justice will potentially pay a bounty of 30% up to $100 million fines and penalties, and 5% between 100 million and 500 million as financial rewards for people who bring information to the department. It's modeled closely on what the Securities and Exchange Commission has in place, but there are a few significant differences. So let's start with, what does it cover? It covers everything that basically is not covered by any other whistleblower program. So the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, regulates or oversees companies who have stock in the United States, or issue or list stock. So I don't mean to pick on Petrobras, but Petrobras has Petrobras USA. And because of that, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission had jurisdiction over them back, well, I guess we're 10 years out of Lava Jato. So Petrobras USA paid fines and penalties around incidents of that matter, in addition to everything else that was regulated. The Securities and Exchange Commission whistleblower program is by law, a law called Dodd-Frank, which was passed in 2010. The Department of Justice is by DOJ fiat, meaning there's no law which authorizes it, although there's a law which says the DOJ can some amorphously reward, and so the DOJ's people who come forward with tips, and the DOJ's taken that as their authority to do this. The information from the whistleblower must be derived from the whistleblower's independent knowledge or their analysis. It must be non-public information and not known to the Department of Justice. It must materially add to any information the DOJ may already possess. And here is the absolute key, and we're going to spend some time talking about this. There's a 120-day requirement. And I'm going to set that aside for a minute because I'm going to spend some time on that. The pilot program excludes information subject to the attorney-client privilege. So I'm a lawyer. If you hire me, you have the attorney-client privilege. I cannot go to the Department of Justice, even if you're engaging in a criminal act. I can go to the department, but I can't get a financial reward. The any allegation made, once again, the individual must be the source of the information. The guidance requires that, well, let me just go to the 120-day rule because this is the thing that's going to impact all of us the most. So I think everyone in here or on this call is aware of the DOJ a self-reporting program, and we've talked about that on prior webinars. We have the Department of Justice says if you self-disclose, if you remediate, if you cooperate, and you disgorge any ill-gotten gains, you are eligible to receive a full declination. And indeed, one was released last week from a company called Boston Consulting Group. So that program is called the Declination Program. And the whistleblower program bumps up against that. So what happens if someone comes to the Department of Justice and provides information? Almost 90%, maybe 95% of all whistleblowers have reported internally prior to going to the Department of Justice. Nobody wakes up one day and says, I'm going to make $100 million by turning over this information that I just found out about. It just doesn't work that way. Whistleblowers almost always try to self-report, and they get frustrated, and that's why they go to the government. Well, now, the minute a whistleblower reports to the government, the clock is on. The clock is on you. It's on all of us. 120 days, a company, if they investigate and self-disclose within that time, can still be eligible for a declination. Now, the problem I see, and the problem everyone else probably is about to ask me about, well, what if we don't know about it? Well, that's on you. You better know about it, and you should know about it, and you're probably going to know about it because it's probably been reported internally, whether it's through your whistleblower program, whether it's through someone going into their supervisor's office, whether it's someone who's raised their hand and spoken up, whatever it may be. So once that initial information is disclosed to the Department of Justice, you as a company have 120 days where you can still take advantage of the declination. The DOJ has not announced or figured out how they're going to compensate a whistleblower under that situation, but that's really not the collective ire problem. And I mean ire, or all of us on this call. That's the DOJ and the whistleblower. We don't have to worry about that. So that 120-day deadline is really everything I've set up to here sort of leads to what I really want to talk to you about today. And that's the pressure I see this puts on the collective us. And it's the pressure not just to get it right. That pressure has always been there. But now the pressure is you have to have the system processes in place today that you can intake information, whether that's through an anonymous reporting system, whether it's through someone picking up the phone and calling the hotline. Like I said, whether it's someone going into their supervisor's office and said, hey, I saw this, I heard this. That information has to get to you in the compliance function so you can effectively triage it, meaning, is this a complaint about someone left milk too long in the refrigerator? Or is this a complaint about we may have fraud in our accounting, or someone may have paid a bribe to get a contract? If it's closer to the latter, then you have to now move to investigate it. Do you have the internal resources to investigate? you need to pick up the phone and call Isabel or Cynthia? Do you need to get in experts who can look at the information and begin to figure out what's going on? Of course, it doesn't stop there, because you have to report up. If you're not the CCO, you've got to get that information to the CCO. You may need to involve the general counsel. You may need to notify the compliance committee or the audit committee of the board of directors. So your entire system for intaking information and moving it up the chain or channel is now a more critical component, I think, than it ever was. So now you've picked up the phone, you've called Cynthia, you've called Isabel. They have done as thorough investigation they can do within about 100 days. And what's that? 3 months. For anyone who wonders about the life of 3 months in a corporation, I will tell you how long it is. That is how long it is. I worked at a major oil field service company, and the joke was it took 6 months to move across the hall. And that's just the way corporations work. But now you really do have the need for speed. So they have done their investigation. They have come on, they've given a report to you. Well, now comes the really difficult part, because you as the compliance professional, you as the general counsel, you as the chief compliance officer have to sit down and have a very difficult conversation with senior management and the board of directors about self-disclosure. You're probably going to want Cynthia and Isabel there, but they're not going to tell you what to do. They may say, these were the facts, this is what it looks like, but they're not going to tell you, do this or do that. That's your decision. They're trusted advisors. So your board is going to have to decide. And many boards and many companies are afraid to self-disclose, because once you open that kimono up, it's not closing. Everything is available for inspection. And so that's the fear many companies have. You can't sort of narrow your self-disclosure to the Department of Justice. You can certainly try that, but it's not going to work once they get the self-disclosure. But the flip side is you can receive a full declination. Now, we've had companies, a company called Cognizant Technologies, that had not just C-suite involvement in the corruption, CEO and general counsel involvement in the corruption, alleged. And that company got a full declination, even with the level of involvement at that height within the corporation. The Boston Consulting Group, the declination that was announced last week, involved partners in a consulting firm that's a true partnership, an LLP, as we would say in the United States. So they had partners involved in the corruption. So it's all a very long-winded way of saying whatever you think the pressure was before, the pressure now is even greater. It's not simply to do the investigation quickly, efficiently, and correctly. It is to have the process in place to get the information to the decision makers in a timely manner so that they can decide, is this something we should self-disclose? Now, you as a company are not going to know if someone has gone to the Department of Justice. So that's going to be an open question. I would assume that they have gone, and I think you have to make that assumption, which means if you don't self-disclose at 122 days, you might get a little phone call, or you might get something what we would call in America a dawn raid at 6 a.m. Federal agents show up at your company and we'd like to see your books and records. So you have to have a process in place to deal with all of that. You have to be able to evaluate your ongoing communications channels. I know in Brazil, because Isabel WhatsApps me all the time. So I know that's an important communication tool that is decidedly frowned upon by U.S. regulators. And so if you haven't captured those communications, it's going to be a very big black mark against you, or what the DOJ would call an off-channel communication. So do you have a policy around off-channel communications? Are you able to capture those if need be? Once again, when the report comes in, say Mr. Whistleblower has gone into his supervisor's office, does your supervisor have the toolkit or the skills to understand I've been given information, I need to pass up the chain? I don't believe it. Could never happen under my watch, but I better pass it up. Do they understand that? Have you trained your middle managers on how to intake information? Or as I would say, be a part of the listen up part of a speak up culture. So there's pressure there. There's pressure to triage it. And if it's close to something that could be an illegal act, you need to get your general counsel involved. You need to have outside counsel involved. You may be with a company that's big enough to have its own investigative staff, forensic analysis, or other. And if you do, that's great. But those people need to be engaged immediately. I can't emphasize enough the importance of having all of this in place before that call comes in or that report comes in. And when I say it puts more pressure on us, that's the pressure that I see. If you don't have this process tied down now would be a very good time after this call is over to start thinking through, how do we intake information in compliance? Is it through an anonymous hotline? Do we have a hotline provider? Do we have a third-party hotline provider? Do we have an internal hotline? Do we have people who come into the compliance office if you're back at work? Do we have people who go in and talk to middle managers? If so, are those middle managers trained on how to listen and how to report? Now, I'm the compliance officer. I have the information. How do I assess it? Is it closer to the spoiled milk in the refrigerator, or is it closer to a potential accounting fraud? Who do I call? Do I know as a compliance officer on Friday night at 7 who to call? Can I call my chief compliance officer at home? Can I call the general counsel at home? Do I send them an email? Well, what happens if their notifications are turned off? How do I get that information? 120 days is 120 days. It's not 120 days plus weekends. But after you've brought in investigative counsel, like I said, that's when the tough part comes, because you're going to have to make a very difficult decision. And you need to provide the decision makers with as much information as you can. People like Isabel and Cynthia will tell them the consequences potentially of their decision. Once again, they will not tell them what to do, and that's not their job. It's the job of the board to make the decision in consultation with senior management, in consultation with the chief compliance officer and the general counsel, with the advice of trusted advisors, third-party advisors. So I know I've spent a fair amount of time emphasizing it, but that's what I really would ask you to take away from this new whistleblower program. I can answer questions about some of the details, but the bottom line is, for everyone on this call, it's going to put more pressure on you, your internal process, your internal hotline, your internal reporting, internal speak up, whatever you may call it, getting the information, assessing it quickly, investigating it if needed, then presenting that information to the decision makers and going forward. Because if you don't, then you're now in the situation where you're not eligible for a declination, and the penalties could go up. They usually go up 10 to 20-fold, because in a declination, you're going to have to give up your ill-gotten gains, or what we would call profit disgorgement. With the Boston Consulting Group, profit disgorgement was about $20 million. If they hadn't self-disclosed, they would probably be looking at a fine in the range of $200 to $300 million. And that's, a huge delta or change or increase. So there are real benefits to self-disclosure. But that 120-day deadline that you don't know about, remember, because you don't know that the whistleblower's gone to the DOJ, when the information comes in, that's when you have to start your investigation at that time. So hopefully I've not scared you too much, maybe a little, but what I really wanted to emphasize is the need for the process. And there are multiple people on this call who have put together a process because they've talked about it in other webinars. So there's help for you out there in the Brazilian compliance community. I'm happy to help, and I know Isabel and Cynthia are happy to help as well. But have that process in place and make sure that your hotline works. Run some tests. Have somebody send a email from somewhere remote. The other thing I would ask you to consider is, do you know if your company has any U.S. touch points? If you're a multinational, probably you do. You have some U.S. touch point, and you may not know about it. So you may not think you are subject to U.S. jurisdiction, but you may wake up to a very rude letter or a very rude phone call one day from the U.S. Department of Justice or the Federal Bureau of Investigation wanting to investigate you. So try to figure out if you have any U.S. touch points. So I guess I've gone my allotted time, and we'll move to Q&A.
Thanks, Tom. I saw a question here on the Q&A from someone from my team. So Isabel, I'll take the liberty of asking it.
Absolutely, Cynthia. I just wanted to emphasize, because maybe I didn't make myself clear. I'm sorry, I'm really stuttering today. That you go into the Q&A or P&R, but the interpreter is you go into mais, right? And then you see the room where the interpreter is, and you change the language into Portuguese if you wish. That's the only emphasis that I wanted to give to this. So those of you who sort of prefer Portuguese, but questions can be in English, Portuguese, I guess Spanish, right, Cynthia? Whatever.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah. We'll figure out. So go ahead, Cynthia. Thank you.
So Diane from Charles River Associates is asking, how does the DOJ plan to collaborate with other agencies such as the SEC or the CFTC under this pilot program? And how prepared do you think the DOJ is for this new pilot program from this collaborative standpoint?
That's a great question. It's a great point. The only thing that upsets me is I didn't mention it in my opening remarks. You may be rest assured that 100% of the time, the Department of Justice will contact one of those agencies. Once it goes into the U.S. government, assume every agency that regulates you knows about it. They're certainly going to pick up the phone and call the SEC. They're certainly going to pick up the phone and call the CFTC. There are other alphabet agencies that are if they are implicated by the information, the DOJ is going to call them as well. So notice to one is notice to all.
Okay.
Does it also include what they call the regulator in Brazil, the CGU, for example? I was in a conference about 3 months ago where they had DOJ representative and a CGU representative, and they say they do speak, but to what extent, how fast do they do it? Can you elaborate on that?
So how fast they do it, that I'm not really privy to, but they do speak, and they do WhatsApp, and they do text, and they talk back and forth. This cooperation, really almost collaboration between Brazilian regulators and the U.S. Department of Justice came from Lava Jato, and personal relationships were developed between prosecutors, and they certainly view each other as colleagues. And if it's a Brazilian company that's involved and is going to require or may implicate Brazilian law as well, you have to assume they're going to notify the appropriate Brazilian authorities.
So, if I may continue, Cynthia, does it mean that if the CGU gets to know about something here, right, do they also let the DOJ and SEC know about it if it's in their jurisdiction?
I would say that 100% of the time, If the CGU finds out something that implicates the United States or the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, they're going to notify the Department of Justice.
So we're counting right now the 120 days, business days, not included weekends, will count that way also. In other words, since you lets the DOJ and SEC know the clock is running, right?
Well, no, because the CGU is not eligible for whistleblower financial rewards. It has to be an individual. Now, what happens, of course, is there's a sharing of the overall fine and penalty, and we saw that from Lava Jato forward. But the 120 days of the whistleblower does not really apply to the CGU. And the reality is, if the CGU notifies the DOJ, you have lost now the ability to self-disclose and get a declination.
Of course, you know, I didn't think of my question very well, but you're absolutely right. But I don't mind. My question at the end is foolish, but it's very clear to our public now, our audience, that you know, in other words, we have to speed, run, and go for it. And before the CGU or any other regulator for that matter, right? Be it the French, the SFO in the UK, or the regulator in Switzerland or anything, we only have 120 days to do it.
So this 120 days does not apply to any regulator. Once a regulator outside the United States notifies the Department of Justice, you've lost any ability to self-disclose.
Correct.
Or receive declination for self-disclosure.
Right. Gone.
Gone.
Forget about the pilot program. Okay. Very clear now. In any case, to everyone, have your questions in the Q&A. The in Portuguese P and R, please. Otherwise, I will still continue to make foolish questions.
Tom, I have a question. I'm
You
sorry.
too. Go
No.
ahead. I was.
And
Go ahead.
and my question may be silly as well, but it has to do with frivolous complaints, you know, to the authorities. How does the DOJ monitor? I mean, are there any penalties? Do we know how many frivolous or unfounded complaints are made? I mean, either by jurisdiction or targeted towards a specific company? I imagine that happens a fair amount. Is the public made aware of that? Does the government have any penalties for complaints that are deliberately, you know, made to target a specific entity negatively?
You keep throwing me these softball questions. It's going to be a long morning. No, not at all.
Okay.
They will take any information, nothing, no consequences. The DOJ wants all information, frivolous or not.
And that's the same for the SEC?
Correct. No penalties.
Wow.
And
Okay.
Tom, if I may, I just want to make sure that I understand it clearly. And you went on and on about this, but I think it's good for us to make it very clear to everyone. Who do I go to once? I mean, the company, go to? I understood the CCO, the Chief Compliance Officer, but it could be any decision making person, or this is the part that I really am wondering, because here in Brazil, unfortunately, a lot of the chief compliance officers were let go in the past 12 months, I want to say. And who do I go to? The moment I understand that we have to do something within the 120 days.
Who's the I in that question?
The company. Okay. So here's the company and knows that we have only 120 days to start investigating and try to be eligible to the full declaration, right? So I get to know something's going on. I must report to the chief compliance officer. Can I go to a board member? Should I go to the CEO? Who gets to know about it that must act? Who is the representative of the company?
So you should have a whistleblower policy in place, and you should have a whistleblower program in place, and there should be someone who monitors that. Simply because you don't have a chief compliance officer is zero, and let me reemphasize, zero excuse. The company has to have someone designated to receive those reports, whoever that is. It could be the janitor.
That is my question. Okay, that is my question.
And then it goes up the chain, and then the company then has to call someone like you, calls U.S. counsel, or the company has to call U.S. counsel and say, here's what we have. And that's a great point. I forgot sort of about that step. So say you've done everything I've suggested. The report comes in, they picked up the phone, they've called Cynthia, they've called Isabel, they've done a report. You as a company have sat down and made the decision to self-disclose. You're going to have to get U.S. counsel involved, and they're going to want to look at everything. So, that's just an additional some time. So all of that factors into your 120 days. But you're going to have a U.S. counsel who can pick up the phone and call the Department of Justice and say, "Now, we want to schedule a meeting to come in. We are self-disclosing this, and we will follow up with a meeting or a written report." And I say that because about 3 years ago, a company called ABB in Switzerland literally called to schedule an appointment to come in and self-disclose, I think within a week. Between the time of that phone call and the scheduled appointment, the story of the corruption was broken in the South African press. So the company could not get self-disclosure credit. And it was that
I remember
close.
you mentioned that. You mentioned that
Right.
in our last breakfast, and I was like, excuse me. That's why I'm trying to put this question very straightforward and very clear. Who is the person? And as you're saying, anyone, if you don't have a chief compliance officer, the point is that you still have to find your way and inform the DOJ or the SEC that you want to go for full disclosure.
So if you're an assistant general counsel in the legal department and you don't have a chief compliance officer and you're listening to this webinar, you need to go back and look at your whistleblower policy and procedure and make sure that if someone has inputted something, someone in the organization is responsible for receiving it.
Thank you. That's very clear. Thank you. Cynthia, do you want to pick up the question from our dear friend, John? Sure.
João Alec, who's, I think he's probably been in all of our 11 breakfasts, Tom. He's asking, it's admirable how often the U.S. authorities struggle to improve enforcement and strengthening ethical corporate behavior. At the same time, it is a shame how rarely Brazilian authorities position themselves in this regard. Actually, lately, they have loosened the few controls that have been created in the past, such as a law for state-owned companies and several others. How can the civil society influence authorities to behave more aligned with international trends?
So that really is tone at the top, and tone at the top in this case means the political side of things. And so there has to be the political will to put the law in place and then enforce the law. From the civil side, though, and literally this is for everyone on this call, if you're doing business with an American company, they're going to demand that you have a compliance program. And I typically represent smaller companies, not multinationals, because I'm a solo lawyer. But I sit in and watch audits of big companies on little companies on their compliance programs. And we have been asked that question. Show us your whistleblower reports. Show us your hotline procedure. And so if you do business with another company that is headquartered in a country such as the United States, such as France, such as Great Britain, or any other country that has a robust anti-corruption law, you, on a business basis alone, are going to be subject to that sort of scrutiny. Number one. Number two is the reason. There's a couple of reasons for that scrutiny. One is companies generally only want to work with companies that are going to do business ethically and in compliance. But more importantly is if a Brazilian company hires an American agent and that American agent engages in bribery and corruption, it's not the American agent who's going to get in trouble. It's the Brazilian company. And so just like American company hiring a Brazilian agent, it's not the Brazilian agent who actually paid the bribe that gets in trouble. It's the American company. So companies have a legal responsibility beyond, those their actual employees. In the United States, it's called vicarious liability. So there's a real business reason to do it. And in terms of civil society, the rule of law is one of the best drivers of an overall global economy because it makes a level playing field. So if you want to go even more philosophical, I'm happy to do that. But the rule of law is critical because for investment dollars, because if I'm a company and I want to invest in a country, I want to have some assurance that the rules, whatever they are going to be followed.
Great, thank you. That's very clear, Tom. We have another question by André Tourinho. He's asking, can an employee of a Brazilian company that has offices in the U.S. benefit from the pilot program to report an irregular event that occurred in Brazil? Is there a connection considering the U.S. offices?
So they would, right now, only the whistleblower program calls for individuals. It doesn't call for companies to be eligible for it. That's a little bit different than the SEC program, which does allow companies to report, say a company has analyzed public records, has come up with some accounting fraud, they can report that to the SEC and be eligible for whistleblower awards. So that's a smaller point. The larger point is if someone in the U.S. does that, the answer is yes.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Sure.
You want to pick up the next one?
Yes. We have another question from Mateus Castro. Given the dynamic regulatory environment in the U.S., what are the biggest challenges the Department of Justice faces in implementing advanced technologies for compliance? Additionally, how is the department adapting to emerging regulations, considering unique challenges like Brazil's rapid adoption of the PIX payment system? He's from Nubank, the Brazilian.
So I'm not familiar with the PIX payment system, so I really can't comment on that. What the DOJ did 2 years ago, in fact, 2 years ago this month, they hired a person named Matt Galvin to head their data analytics program. Matt worked for a company called AB InBev, I think the Brazilian company. AB InBev in America is best known for Budweiser. At any rate, he was the first person that put a data analytics program into a major U.S. company. And he built that program out, and he was perceived as the sort of the top in-house compliance person. DOJ hired him, and they hired him to, number one, drive data analytics into U.S. compliance programs, but equally importantly, to set up a data analytics program for the Department of Justice to data mine publicly available information for FCPA, trade sanction, or antitrust violations. That was sort of step one. That's data analytics. That was 2 years ago. I know we're way past data analytics. And now we're thinking about AI and other emerging technologies. Each department, cabinet department in the U.S. now has a chief AI officer, and they are evaluating the use of that technology, both in terms of prosecutions from the Department of Justice, but also to evaluate how companies are using that in their compliance programs. It's still an emerging part of certainly the Department of Justice and the SEC's enforcement efforts. And all I can tell you is that it's ongoing. And when we get more information, we'll certainly talk about it.
And just to
Great.
contextualize, Tom, PIX is it's an instant payment system. I think it was launched. It's like Zelly.
Zelly. I was going to say it's like Zelly.
Okay.
Just so you know.
Yeah. Okay, we have another question from Rodrigo Moreno, and he says, he asks, with the DOJ's new pilot program incentivizing whistleblowers while also encouraging voluntary self-disclosure under the 2023 corporate enforcement policy, how can companies balance these potentially conflicting pressures? Might it increase whistleblower activity, make firms more cautious about self-disclosing due to internal risks? And how should they navigate this tension to maintain proactive compliance?
Well, I think we have the topic for our next webinar.
Yeah,
wow.
Very good, Rodrigo. You made it.
So let me see if I can break that down a little bit. I think it puts more pressure on compliance programs to get it right. So internally, you have to be ready to make that decision. Now, as to the decision, I tend to view things, I would say I'm more conservative, but I'm more conservative about self-disclosure because I see the benefits of self-disclosure. A lot of business people who you would think, well, they're more aggressive than a compliance officer are actually less aggressive about making a self-disclosure because they don't want to open up the company to sort of everything. And so I tend to see self-disclosure in this context, self-disclosure in DOJ's enforcement, self-disclosure around M&A activity, meaning if there's a safe harbor that you have 12 months to self-disclose in, all of that is, for me, a big reason to self-disclose because I see the penalties as so much lower. So that's just sort of where I shake out on that personally.
Great. Maybe we'll do it in our next breakfast, which will be December 4th. We'll get back to you on this.
Yeah, copy and paste that question into our title for our next event.
Absolutely. Cynthia, do you have any questions?
I do. I have a question that I prepared before the webinar, Tom. How do you think the pilot program will affect the expectations placed on corporate boards, specifically regarding oversight and governance?
So I don't think it changes the expectations on corporate boards around governance. I think it changes the need to get that information to the board more quickly, more efficiently, so the board can make a decision. We don't see often a board completely either dropping the ball or refusing to intake the information and make a decision. Sometimes they may make a decision that you and I think are wrong, but that's still a business decision. You can decide not to self-disclose and the consequences may be severe. You can decide to self-disclose and the consequences may be severe. So I don't really see it impacting the boards or putting more pressure on the board governance. I see more pressure on the board to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you know what, Tom, you mentioned something that I always talk to my clients about. When I teach at the universities where I'm a guest professor, is the touch points. I love that subject because I don't think that everyone understands exactly what the touch point is. And I try to make it clear to clients, and clients resist it and they say, I have nothing to do with the US. This FCPA, whatever, does not reach me. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. So how do you know you don't have any U.S. touch points? How do you know money was
Exactly.
not wired through the U.S. banking system? I'm not as well versed on the Brazilian banking system as I am on the European banking system and the Bank of England. So I will speak to those and tell you how you can get into trouble not even knowing it. There is, between the US Fed, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of England, they routinely transfer money between each other to sort of level out if someone's too high or too low, and they do that on a daily basis. In America, we call it a Fed funds transfer, and that's done nightly. And so you may have made a payment in the United Kingdom, and it obviously went into a huge pot of money. Well, if that pot of money happened to be a part that was transferred to the U.S. Federal Reserve as part of an overnight Fed funds transfer, guess what? You've now availed yourself of the U.S. banking system, and there's U.S. jurisdiction on that. How would you ever know that? You would never know that. There's no chance you would ever find that out until an enforcement action. And I can't tell you that's what happened, but I will tell you about Total. Total, about 15 years ago, had an enforcement action, and they paid a $400 million fine for bribes paid into Iran back when you could actually do business with Iran. That's how long ago it was. They paid $61 million in bribes. Of that $61 million, 500,000 somehow magically went to the U.S. banking system. And no one's ever explained how $61 million of bribes paid to Iranian officials went through a U.S. banking system. So everyone thinks it was that overnight Fed funds transfer. That's one way. Two is, do you have any internet service providers who have servers in the U.S.? And if you have an internet service provider, even if it's a Brazilian company, and there's a server in the U.S., your email goes to the U.S. for transmit or storage, you now have U.S. jurisdiction. And finally, there's something called ADR. It's called American Deposit Registry. And ADR is like a stock, but it's not being listed on the U.S. Stock Exchange. It allows foreign companies to avail themselves of doing business in the U.S. without a public listing. The problem is you got to subject yourself to U.S. jurisdiction. So there's a large, and I mentioned Petrobras, USA, or I mentioned Petrobras. They had ADRs. Petrobras, the Brazilian company, Petrobras. And so that was one way the U.S. had jurisdiction over the parent company. So there's multiple ways. And of course, if you have someone who flies to the U.S. to meet for corrupt intent, that creates your jurisdiction as well. So if you have a BD
Perfect.
person flying to the U.S. and you don't know about it, that's on you.
Right. I try to explain to my clients, they always get very upset because they say, no, I have nothing to do with the States. And the United States should mind their own business. But the reality is that, the touch points sometimes are kind of funny. I found out a client was buying a company, and this company, the CFO was an American, the CFO of the company.
There you
That's
go.
huge touch point, but not even the owner of the company kind of knew it, because the CFO was born in the States, but was a Brazilian, just like Cynthia and I are Brazilian Americans. We don't go out and tell people exactly where we were born and how and et cetera. Well, I know that this is a huge touch point, right?
If you're an American, you're subject to the FCPA on a worldwide basis.
Exactly. Tom, I can't believe it's we only have kind of 4 minutes. So before I give the podium back to Cynthia, I just wanted to say that you have a great paper on this that will be distributed to all who attended the breakfast with us. It was translated by our dear team member Viviane, who's with us. It's Portuguese and English, and will be distributed to everyone. And I wanted to get back to those of you who have been contacting me to how to acquire Tom's books. There is a person of LexisNexis in charge of doing it. So please do contact me and I will put you in touch with her, and you can buy from LexisNexis, right, Tom? And she will then send it to you here in Brazil. It is true that unfortunately Amazon's not shipping it to Brazil anymore. Cynthia, before you have your closing remarks, our next breakfast with Tom Fox, and I did have my breakfast. You know, I'm a true breakfast person because I do have breakfast with Tom Fox. It's going to be on December 4th, which is a Wednesday. And we hope to have Flavia Lipicki, the head of the Compliance Commission of the Brazilian Bar Association, with us. So, my words, Tom. Thank you so much. Cynthia?
Thank you. Thank you, Isabel. Tom, I don't know if we can squeeze my last question, but I think everybody will like to walk away from this webinar knowing whether, are you seeing any trends in the US, any specific sectors being targeted? When I first read the pilot program, I thought, is this more of the same? But I guess with your new insights, no. What do you think prompted this new pilot program? And I don't mean to put you under pressure here, but I think these are the best closing remarks for this group here today.
So what prompted the pilot program was the success of the SEC whistleblower program. They are getting literally thousands of tips per year. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been paid out in financial incentive payments under that program. And I think the Department of Justice correctly saw that as a source of tips and information about companies engaging in illegal conduct. And they had the ability to create this program. So I think it was clear to the DOJ that the success of the SEC was something they wanted for themselves as well. Number one, in terms of trends, this has been, there were no FCPA corporate enforcements in Q2. We had a declination last week, so there's not been a lot of public information about companies, but there's a huge number of prosecutions around individuals. So it may be the DOJ is sort of, and particularly around oil trading companies, and unfortunately, particularly around Brazil. So lots of oil trading companies were paying bribes into Brazil and other countries in South America to make oil trades. And now the individuals who paid those bribes, the companies have all settled. And now the individuals who paid those bribes are going to trial. I think we had 3 this summer, and we're 1 right now, just started. So it may be the DOJ is focusing a little more on individuals right now, but we just haven't seen a large number of corporate FCPA enforcement actions.
Right. And if I may add, I'm sorry, just 1 second more over when the Dodd-Frank Act was enacted back in 2020, we would see the report that the Congress, the SEC would give it to the U.S. Congress, right? And that's how we know about the numbers of whistleblowers. And there was no Brazilian listed there. And I follow it. I only do it, Tom, because I'm a professor, so I'm always teaching this at my classes. The number grew so much so that nowadays in 2024, the number of Brazilian whistleblowers grew incredibly. And if the audience is interested, just Google whistleblower program, SEC report to the Congress, and you will see how the Brazilians are more and more using the program. This was the SEC. This was under Dodd-Frank Act. But now with a pilot program, maybe we can talk about it the next time also in December, because I do think that the Brazilians will absolutely use this opportunity. The whistleblowers, I'm saying.
Yes, both the DOJ and SEC take whistleblowers from outside the United States. So it's a big emerging market, we would say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Money-making opportunity, perhaps.
The bounty, I like it, right? Oh, by the way, an attorney obviously cannot be a whistleblower. An attorney
Under
here,
the-
me,
You can under the SEC program.
but not DOJ because of
Not-
the attorney-client privilege. Okay.
Right.
We'll make this one very clear point also. So I don't want to say anything anymore because we can go on for like forever. Tom.
Thank you. Thank
My
you,
pleasure,
Isabel.
guys.
Thank you, Tom. And we'll see you again in December.
If anyone has any
December
questions, they
4th.
can email me directly.
Absolutely.
All right.
Very
Buy
good.
the book.
Always, always. Tom would love to be here all the time. He always says, I want to go to Brazil for a bigger audience, but please contact him directly. Also, this is very important, Tom. If you have any questions, like, do you think Tom can help your company? Go straight to him, right? You take clients, right, Tom?
I do.
Very good.
Great.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Isabel, Tom.